Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Megan with your host, Megan Judge. I'm going to start out a little light and then I'm not going to lie. I might go a little dark, but that's because I have to. I can't shut my mouth sometimes about certain things. So let's start light. What I will tell you is, I have some friends that I every day pick up my kids at school and we laugh a lot and it's this nice group of moms. And I was telling them how I don't and I've talked openly about this on the podcast before, how I hate wearing thong underwear. It's not fun. I feel like I did my years of like wearing thongs and now I just want to wear like Hanes for her, like breathable undies. And my friends were like, you're joking, right? Like, that's funny, but like, no, you cannot do that. My husband doesn't think it's funny at all. He's like, no, go back to what was happening before. And I'm just like, no, I did my time. Like, I'm in my 40s. Like, I'm good. I did my time wearing those underwear. And now I'm starting to like lean heavily on the idea of wearing a dress bathing suit. So, um, Suki, I might want to bring you in on this. I think you might be younger than me, but um, I mean, don't you think the idea of a dress bathing suit seems like kind of comforting? Like these old ladies, like back in the day, or even now, like I go places and I'm like, they seem to be enjoying themselves in their dress bathing suits,
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah. I look at pictures of old, like
yeah,
Vogue from like 1930 and I'm like, now that's a bathing suit I can get behind. Like it's like basically like a tube top that goes to like your mid
yeah.
thigh with like some straps or like even a little cap sleeve would be nice.
A cap sleeve's not good on me. I know you're a former model. A cap sleeve is never good on me. I'm thinking more like a dress bathing suit that covers like your whole body except for like part of your legs. That's the idea I'm going with. And yes, everyone thought it was funny and they said, no, don't do that. And I said, oh, just you wait for the summer because guess who's showing up on the beach in a dress bathing suit? And I'll say that. I'll start there. My second thing is, do some housekeeping notes. You can get the book Her Badass Story 3. It's available on Amazon. You can also get it on my website. You can follow me now on TikTok. I find my TikToks pretty funny. Um, Probably other people don't. I don't really understand TikTok, but I'm now starting to understand it and get with it right as they're about to ban TikTok. And then, you can also join Patreon. So I wanted to make sure I talked about those few things. And then before I introduce Suki, fully introduce her, I want to talk about a more serious topic, which is these shootings. And I know that I had a guest on a few weeks ago, Daryl Stevens, who's a dear friend of mine, and it got very heated and very political. And I'm sure because I really try not to go into the political discussions, I probably lost listeners. That's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with everybody having their opinions, but what I'm not okay with is people shooting young children in schools and churches and farmers markets and colleges. And I have a 9-year-old. I was a wreck. I was a wreck the other day after this happened. I happened to know one of the girls in Nashville. I went to boarding school with her, and she had told me that she knows the family that lost one of their children, a 9-year-old girl. I believe her name was Evelyn. And when we hear that shootings are the number one killer of kids right now, like there is a problem. And our elected officials have to wake up, because if your child had cancer, you would give that child chemotherapy. If you knew that there was people that were mentally ill and going into schools with AR-15s, like, you do your freaking job. Like, I don't know what else to say. I don't want to, I don't think anybody, like the percentage of the population that believes that guns, like understand people have the right to bear arms and have a gun, but there's absolutely no reason for anybody to not have a background check and to be carrying an AR-15 into a school. And that woman went to 5 different gun stores. Like, I don't know. Suki, can I bring you in really quickly? I hate to put you on the spot, but your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. It's saddening in such a deep on such a deep level. And I don't know if it's just like because I'm a mother that
Mhm,
it feels so gutting or heartbreaking, or that I'm just human.
mhm.
The fact that like it's not even unusual for this to happen is obscene. Like it's ridiculous that like that's something that happens in the United States and it's not being addressed. And it makes me so angry that it's so politicized. These are children dying. These are children that are just going to school, doing something normal. That the there should be no risk for them to be harmed, let alone killed in that situation.
And being a mom, how old are your kids?
My kids are older; they're college age. So,
Okay. But
yeah,
still, like, kids in colleges are getting shot. I mean,
yes,
this is
yeah,
happening. There's been 129 mass shootings. That's more mass shootings than days of the year thus far. And and I'm floored. I told a story actually 2 weeks about this when I was like going down the rabbit hole of getting fired up with Daryl, and I just said, my daughters went to school a couple of weeks ago, and there was like an Amber Alert on somebody's phone, and they all got freaked out because they were like, "Oh, we're not supposed to be doing this drill today," but they got confused. And
mm,
can you imagine, like, I know when I was a kid, we would do these like um these these drills where if Russia was like dropping a nuclear bomb, right? And so we
mhm,
would all like hide under our desk. But like now you have these drills and you have to be scared that somebody's going to walk into a classroom with an AR-15, and it's just like a reality for them, and it's robbing them of their innocence and their child. It's robbing them of their childhood. This is
yeah,
not okay.
yeah,
So for a long time, I said on this podcast, I don't want to get political because I really want this to be a space where people come to learn about people getting over the worst trials and experiences in life, or they've gone through loss or drug addiction or alcoholism or whatever it is. And they know it's a safe space to come here because I want you to know, as listeners, that I care about you and I care about your stories and I care about you as human beings. And we all should be caring about each other as human beings. And this is just, to me, like, there's a couple things that I am not okay with. And one is equality. Everybody should be treated equally. One is guns, like being legalized for people that are mentally ill and not doing background checks. And another one is like homophobia. Like, those things are just absolutely not okay with me. And so if I am starting out this podcast and according to you getting political, I apologize. I would never want to alienate somebody or make them mad, but this should not be political. This is a human issue, and people need to like stop caring so much about money, because the next thing you know, politicians, this could be your kid, and then maybe you'll shut up and you'll do something about it and you won't care so much about money. That's it. That's all I'll say. Drop the mic. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
Everyone, I am honored to have Suki Jones on the podcast today. Suki is a former model, and she also has a book out, right? Or a book that's available on pre-order. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Suki, welcome to the podcast. I'm so honored to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Let me hear a little bit about your story. Where are you from originally? I always start there.
Originally, I am from the Midwest. I grew up in Nebraska. And then we moved to California, to the Bay Area, when I was like a tween, like just before my teen years.
And you're like a true San Francisco person.
I would say I'm a true Bay Area person.
True.
Like we actually just moved out of San Francisco.
You did?
But I mean, I've been in the Bay Area the majority of my life.
I love San Francisco. It's it's just
too.
like the energy. To me, it's more, it's like I was briefly in New York and I hated it. What I love about San Francisco is that it's like the best of both worlds, like it's like you're still on the West Coast. I prefer West Coast. I've lived here 20 plus years of my life and it's just beautiful. I mean, it really is. There's obviously we have issues in California, but that's a totally separate podcast. So tell me, was your childhood happy?
It was not particularly happy. It's funny because we talked off, before the podcast about the writing process and writing a book. And when I was writing the book, you have to delve deep into all these things that you've, processed in your life. And it was really hard. I had some exceptionally traumatic things happen in my childhood that I kind of tend to skim over as an adult, or I think most of my life, I kind of like, I knew they were difficult, but when you are writing about it and reliving it, it really focuses on like, oh, wow, that was really not good for anyone, and particularly a child. So,
what are some of the things you went through, if you're comfortable talking
absolutely
about that?
I mean, it's in the book, it's all out there. So
yeah,
so there's, I mean, I'm literally an open book. So my parents, my mom and dad, my dad was an alcoholic. He was very Jekyll and Hyde in his alcoholism. He was a very big guy. He was like 6'4" and like boisterous and life of the party and charismatic, and told tall tales and like just this big like character, And so on the outside, like with family, friends, like things like that, that's how people perceived him. At home, it was a different story. He was, he drank from like sun up to sundown. And the version and I didn't have siblings, so it was just my mom and I in the house. And so the version that we got of him was, sometimes it was the fun part. Sometimes it was him like playing practical jokes and like just outlandish, crazy, shenanigans in the house. But a lot of the time it was being physically disciplined for combing my hair the wrong way, or not eating everything on my plate, or cutting my food the wrong way, or like all like weird little tiny things that he would like focus on and pinpoint. And like, a lot of the times I didn't even know that I was doing something wrong, and then I'd be punished for it. And so it made me very hyper sensitive to everything around me. Like I was always kind of on high alert and like stressed out that like, oh, like, am I going to be in trouble for that? Am I going to get punished for that? It was just a lot to go through as a kid. And then my mom and my father had their own relationship where he, I don't know that he got physical with my mom so much, like they might have pushed each other and stuff. Like I got like beatings, like when the belt came out. But with my mom, it was a lot of arguing, a lot, quite frequently. So, like I would be in my room or in my closet. Like I would go in my closet because I was like, I need another level of like another door between me and my room to like block out what's happening. Um, so that was a lot to process as a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm sure you're aware of this, but that's being an ace. So that's an
Yes.
adverse childhood experience. And those experiences take us into our adulthood, and they're going to manifest in some way. Many
Absolutely.
times, like 90% of the time, they manifest into like self harm or alcoholism or suicide or all of these things that, because we bottle up this pain and we don't know how to process it because our brains are not fully developed. Right.
Right.
That's how it manifests. But we were talking before you started that. And by the way, I am so sorry to hear that, because it's very, very difficult to, you know, flash back to your childhood and think of those kinds of experiences. I was
Mhm.
talking to one of my best friends yesterday, Josh, and I was telling you too that I'm trying to write this book, and it's really hard, like you just kind of touched on, to sit down, and I have blocked out so much of my childhood, like memories, like things that are just like too painful, like I just can't go there. And I was telling that Josh and I have been friends for like 20 years. And I was telling him yesterday, my stepfather was extremely abusive, like mentally abusive. And had an eating disorder. And he, I have these like flashbacks while I'm sitting there writing now of like things that he did and said. And it's very painful. It's very
Mhm.
painful to bring this stuff up, but it's also healing, once you get to this point. And I'm assuming like writing your book, which by the way, I'm going to plug right now because I didn't when I introduced you. See Swallow Me. And it's available for pre-order now on Amazon. Where is it going to?
Amazon, it's available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, Smash, we're at like a gaggle of places.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
local stores. So going back to the childhood stuff, was your dad like, do you think he was just like an angry alcoholic and that's how he was able to? I think a lot of times so there's different kinds of alcoholics. My stepfather
Absolutely.
was also an alcoholic. He was an angry alcoholic, but he would also like pass out at the table. Um, some alcoholics are happy alcoholics.
Yes. Yeah.
But many, it can manifest in anger. So that just like stuck with you, that you were very hypersensitive. And then tell me about like how you got in, like how it was growing up and like becoming a teenager and all of that stuff. Did it get better or?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
so, so my dad's so like alcoholism often does, it
Hmm.
escalates. So, my my mom and dad had split up so many times. Like I don't, I couldn't even count how many times they would split up and get back together. And he was also a womanizer. So that's how my mom would label it, as he was a womanizer.
Hmm.
Um, he started a relationship with a woman that he ended up going on a binge, a drug and alcohol binge with, and leaving the state we were in. So he just took off with this woman. My mom and I had no idea where he was. And then when he did come back home, that was the beginning of their eventual like final separation. But his alcoholism had escalated to a point where he was now using drugs frequently, and had had put a hit out on my mom. So we had to leave the state. There was an attempted kidnapping by him. I was 8 years old and I was drugged with Quaaludes, and that was my first experience with drugs. And then we came out to California, and we were staying with my mom's parents, and my grandfather started sexually assaulting me. And this is all, like preteen.
Mhm.
So it's, I think it's a combination for me. It's a combination of my DNA and all the trauma that I experienced growing up. That like when I got into junior high and found the party kids, I was off to the races. Like that
Yeah.
was, like exactly like the out I was looking for. That was like the double barrier your triple barrier of like blocking out uh, all this stuff that I didn't know how to process.
That's a lot. And
It was a lot.
I'm
Yeah.
really sorry to hear that. More than any, like a lot of times when I have people come on, they tell me these stories and it's like, I don't understand why some people have to carry this stuff in life. It will really honestly never make sense to me. I think you're so strong to like tell your story and share your story because all it does is really honestly help other people. And then it normalizes people asking for help and talking about these things. And that's so important.
Thank
Um,
you.
so when you got into that age group of like teen, you were running with like a fast crowd, was that kind
Mhm.
of where you got into like drugs and alcohol?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also because I felt really different, like moving from the Midwest to California. I felt like Laura Ingalls. I really felt like a hayseed. And so like having a common bond kind of with these kids, like where, oh, like I'll be into drugs and they're into drugs. And so that will make me acceptable. Like there was an amount of peer pressure, but for me, like it's something I willingly accepted. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do this. And it worked for a while because it kind of gave me a built-in support system. Like all of a sudden I had all these friends and we, hung out all the time because we were partying together all the time. So I mean it as is said, like it kind of worked until it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, that's common. You want to be, the drugs help you escape and the alcohol helps you escape and you're free and you don't have to think about the pain
Yeah. Yeah.
until it comes back and the pain's even worse when
Right.
you come
Yeah.
down. Yeah. 100%. So what ended up happening? Did it get really bad? Like you started to turn to like heavier drugs?
I did start to turn. I kind of well, I didn't. So this is interesting because I was hanging out with primarily, stoner kids, like kids that were
Mhm.
smoking pot. I really did not like pot, so
Mhm.
I was a bad stoner. So I liked, and I didn't. I liked the way alcohol affected me, but in my head, like I had this image of my dad, this alcoholic, and so I wasn't consciously thinking like no one had ever said to me like, oh, like your dad's an alcoholic, so be careful, because that just wasn't something that was like commonplace really, like in the 80s to
No, people didn't talk.
didn't talk about that.
Isn't it crazy that like there's a couple good things that are going on now. I'm going to say a couple because there's lots of bad things, but
Yeah.
we are at an advantage now that people openly talk about this stuff.
Yes.
Whereas I think you're so right. It just wasn't like you would never know if like your next door neighbor's parent was an alcoholic, or you wouldn't know anything that there were mental health challenges. You would just
Right.
not know. Nobody talked about it.
Yeah.
It's so weird to me that that's what our world was. It was like living in this weird balloon, right? Where we just
Yeah.
didn't talk about stuff and
Yeah.
kept everything in. It sounds really awful when I think about it and remember that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So alcohol, while I drank it, like I would try to control my drinking, like
Mhm.
even at like 13, I was trying to control it, uh but I always wanted more. So, I would end up getting drunk and smoking pot, which I didn't like. And then eventually, like I was at a party with some friends and I did cocaine. And like,
Mhm.
and as soon as I did, I remember with such clarity the first time I did cocaine, because it was like fireworks going off. It was just like a curtain had been pulled open. And I was like, oh, this is it. So I was like, oh, okay, like there's an alternative, there's a different kind of drug that won't make me feel paranoid and all the things that pot did. I mean, I would literally smoke pot and be like, oh my God, when is this going to end? And why did I do it again?
Mhm.
So, but with cocaine, I was like, oh my God, when can I do this again? It was it was an again, but like of a different nature. Like that was something like I fixated on, like, where can I get it? Who has it? Where will it be at this party? So that was really a turning point in my drug use. And then
What age were you at that time?
I
Like
think
when
I wasn't driving and I had gone to a party with older girls and I think I was 13.
No, you
Yeah.
started cocaine at ugh,
Yeah.
that breaks my heart. That
Yeah.
just
I mean,
is
it's
devastating.
when I see 13-year-olds now, or even
Yeah.
my own kids when they were at that age, I was like, oh my God, like the things I was doing at that age, like it's like, but at the time, and because I had gone through so much, I felt older because of the circumstances in my
Mhm.
life and what
Mhm.
I'd already had to deal with. And my mom and I didn't live in a great neighborhood. She really struggled to, like, make rent and like provide for me. So she wasn't home a lot. So like I took on the role of an adult at an early age, like preparing meals and, like doing things for the pets and, like cleaning the house and like laundry and all that stuff. Like I took that on early. So I didn't feel young doing the drugs. Like I didn't feel like, oh, I'm too young to be doing this. I felt um, like I was rewarding myself, kind of like the way my mom did when she had a beer when she got home from work. Like it was like justified to me.
Mhm. Mhm. That breaks my heart that it was that you could even have access to that at that age.
Yeah.
Like growing up where I grew up in DC, outside of DC, I think back and I'm like, wow, I'm very fortunate that it was only like beer. Like people
Hmm.
were drinking beer and like Bartles and James.
Yes.
Like that just didn't exist. And thank God, because I was like you. I was one of those kids that like really wanted to fit in. And, you know, I was dealing with all kinds of emotional abuse and pain from my childhood, and I would have turned to anything. So when you tell these stories, I hope that people understand that when kids turn to things like this, it's because they just don't see any other option,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
the great escape. The great escape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a tool for me. It was a way
Mhm.
of me. And I also struggled with eating disorders at the same time and was starting
Mhm.
to get into modeling. So they all were like, you know, um, cords that went into the same like extension cord, like they all kind of plugged into each other. Like all
Mhm.
these things worked in conjunction. Like I was trying to control or process what I was going through by supplementing it with drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, perfectionism. All of these things were just the symptom of what was going on with me.
So how did you get into the model? You got into modeling around 13, and San
Yes.
Francisco is a big hub for modeling.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it's not as big as like LA, but or New
or
York,
LA
or
or New
yeah,
York. Yeah, but
but
they have like a decent, right? I mean, I've always
yeah,
heard that. Okay.
yeah.
And were you just like starting to book and got an agent and all of that stuff? And then obviously eating disorders are very prevalent in modeling.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit about that and about how you started out modeling.
Well, I had an aunt that actually I didn't think liked me very much. She was kind of ornery and cantankerous, and she had gotten me involved in, like, there was something in the newspaper that, for looking for models, and it was reputable and all that. So that was kind of my segue into that. And I started doing like local things, just local, like department store, and like going for commercials and things like that. I did, during the time that I had my eating disorder, I started working with a therapist, and he was kind of on a speaker circuit, sort of. So I started speaking with him about eating disorders. And so I was like, 14, speaking to groups about my eating disorder.
Mhm.
And it got picked up on a television show. And I was on like a local, evening news kind of segment, which was was wildly unpopular at my school with the kids. Like it did not make me popular. Like it made me it was like jealousy or contempt, or I don't know what it
Mhm.
was, but it really didn't benefit me in any way socially. Which, like at the time, like I had segued out of my eating disorders, was getting help. I'd been hospitalized. I'd had suicide attempts at this point.
Mhm.
And so that I took the eating disorders out of the mix and was, like working, doing some modeling and like partying. And that was my jam. Like that was, my whole life was like uh, punk shows and going to concerts and doing drugs and like, modeling and acting jobs. And that was my focus. My focus was not, however, on school. So as those things progressed, I started going to school less and less.
Were
So
were you were you in like public school and you just kind of did you end up like dropping out
I
and
did end up
yeah,
dropping out. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And then you were able to pay the bills by modeling?
Well, I was living with my mother. So
Okay.
so I, it was just, like whatever money I made went toward, like drugs usually, or I had I did I'm trying to remember what the term is. It's like leasing a horse. I sponsored a horse for a little while because
Uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
had some money. My mom was like, "Well, we can't afford that." I was like, "I have money saved up. We can afford it. I can do that." So I had this short period where I had a horse, but like it was just, what are you going to do with money when you're that young? You don't think about like saving it,
No,
or
not at all. Let me ask you, was the eating disorder, so we kind of skipped over like how you landed in therapy.
yeah.
So how did
Um,
that happen?
well, the therapist
Mhm.
that I've worked with mostly all my life was speaking at my school, and he was, talking. There was another young woman that was with him that was talking about like how she was bulimic. Like I was just blown away. Like I couldn't believe someone was in the auditorium up on the stage talking about binging and purging and starving yourself. I was blown away. Uh, First of all, I was blown away that like other people were doing this to the point that they would have like a something in the auditorium focused on that was the topic. And and yeah, that I was really needing and wanting help, and like I, for whatever reason, in that instant felt brave enough to go up after they finished the speech, that I went up and asked for help and said, I think I have a problem. And so that, that led me to working with this particular therapist for the majority of my life. Like it's been, I mean, I haven't seen him every week for the entirety of my life, but I have worked with him on and off throughout my entire life, when I need to.
That's crazy. You're
It
very
is.
lucky. You're very
Yes.
fortunate that
Yeah.
you found somebody like that, because that's part of the problem is people try therapy. And I say to my listeners a lot, like you're going to have to make multiple attempts at this. Usually
Absolutely.
it's not like just like a one hit, like I say it's kind of like dating. right? You have to date a bunch of people. It's the same thing with therapy to meet the right therapist. So you're lucky you were matched up with a good therapist.
Yes.
So when did the drug addiction get really bad for you?
I think in the 90s it
Okay.
progressed. Like I had 2 children, and I was raising 2 small children as a single mom.
And you were
And
very young,
yeah,
obviously. Yeah.
yeah. So I but I was really kind of peaking for I would say my career peaked like in the 90s. Like I was very much the look that people that was popular. I had the Uma Thurman bob, and I was, like wafer thin,
Hmm.
tall, pale, like I had the whole heroin chic look down. And I had done opiates and other narcotics, and like when I started doing heroin, it was very much like the kind of blast off feeling that I had doing cocaine for the first time. It was just like it was like falling in love, which sounds terrible, but it's so true. Like it was just this feeling that you have never been more satisfied and more I'm making heroin sound really good. It's not. But
Well, there's a reason why people
there's a reason
do
people
it
keep doing
because
it.
because it's like your first time doing it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've never tried it, but your first
Yeah.
time doing it, it's like
It's
you will
amazing.
always be chasing that high, right?
Exactly. Because it's
Yeah.
never going to feel like that. I mean, there's been
Mhm.
times like, there were times, and I can't say that it was all horrific and that it was all terrible. I went to
Mhm.
some amazing parties. I dated some amazing people. I like went amazing places. Like I did some really fantastic things. But my life was falling apart like while I was doing those things. And I kind of like glossed over that part, like, oh, like, just taking care of my kids and like paying bills. And even when I had the means to do that, I was so enamored by heroin, and so 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 constantly chasing after that feeling that nothing else mattered. And not that nothing else didn't matter. Things did matter, but that was my priority, was getting the next fix and making sure I had enough of it. And then eventually, that it wasn't even about that anymore. It was just about not being sick anymore, because, like after you can't sustain that, like you can't sustain it.
How long? So I'm assuming you were successfully modeling and making a decent living to
Yeah.
support your kids and your heroin habit. How long until it got bad? Like how long until you were like, okay, this is really bad and I have an addiction and I'm sick?
It was years. I mean, it was years
Okay, so
that,
it took
and
you.
I mean, there were, I definitely had, like dope sickness,
Mhm.
quick, like before I start, how do I want to say this? So there was dope sickness that, but I would not think that I had a problem. I would be dope. So wake up dope sick and feeling awful, and think like, oh, well, it's not the drugs. It's not the heroin I did, or it's not the 30 Vicodin I did, or the Dilaudid I got at the hospital yesterday. Cause I would doctor shop and go to hospitals and say like, I feel awful. I have the worst headache ever. And they, shoot me up and send me home. And then the next day I'd be, just wretchedly sick, but I wouldn't believe that it was from the drugs. Like
But
I just
also,
wouldn't believe that.
do you think it's because in the industry you were in, it was very normal, like that people were openly doing drugs to stay
I mean,
thin
for
and
sure, that
yeah.
that for sure played into it, and not even just in modeling and acting, but like
Mhm.
in the group of friends that I ran with. Like I ran with people that were, rock musicians, and people that are artists, and all these like fun characters. And they were all doing drugs. And so, I mean, there was no lack of drugs. Like it was just readily available all the time. So,
Well, I have lived in Hollywood, and I worked in all the nightclubs when I was young and knew all, the celebrities and stuff. And you would just go to parties and it was everywhere,
right.
like
Yeah.
that was just like a normal scene to just
Yeah.
be like, oh, we're going to this club. And you would just see everybody doing coke. And that was just normal. I never encountered heroin or anybody doing it, but I knew it was around. So I think that people that listen maybe are like, well, how would you even do that? Well, in that industry or in these industries, and it's very prevalent, especially because, I'm in my 40s and it was around when I was young too. And, it's very sad. It's very sad that people turn to these things, but you think about how many people are in pain or they just want to be accepted. At the end of
Mhm.
the day, like the majority of people that pick up a drug, it's because they're in pain and they want to be accepted, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me when your addiction got to the point where you were like, I can't, this is affecting my life and I'm not going to be able to go on. Did you get so sick that you almost died, or did you have like an aha moment? What happened?
Well, interestingly enough, like, before I had hit the point where I was like, daily, like waking up dope sick and chasing drugs all day,
Hmm.
I had in my group of friends started dating someone, and he was very much like in his addiction. Like he was at the point that I would be at a year from meeting him or a year
Hmm.
from us starting a relationship. So we hadn't been seeing each other very long, and he actually died. And it was a car accident, and it was it was the hardest thing like that I had experienced in a long time, like since my teen years. Like it was something that really rocked my foundation. Like it was, and I'd had other instances around his death where somebody I knew had died from flesh eating virus because of IV drugs. I had another friend that had been shot execution style in a drug deal. So, like, I wasn't experiencing a lot of consequences for myself. Like, I had had some hospital visits and blood poisoning and some psychotic mental health issues. Like, but as far as consequences, like with the law or where it was super close to home, like where it was like not somebody that was like just a friend, this is somebody that was in my life daily,
Yeah.
um, to just be ripped out of my life and gone, that was it really it sent me into a spiral. Like I remember the initial thought I had uh, the night he passed away. All of my friends and I went to his house, and he lived with two other roommates. So we were at the house, and I remember sitting on the couch and thinking, I am so done. Like I am done with this lifestyle. Like I'm not doing this anymore. And by the end of that week, I was using heavier and harder, and it was a direct, it was a direct consequence of that. I didn't know how to process it. I wasn't reaching out for help. My support system were all people that were using. My family members.
What about your therapist? Were they still in the
I wasn't
picture?
I wasn't seeing him at that time
Yeah. Yeah.
because I would tend to like I would be doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Or I was talking recently somewhere else and saying, like there's this thing where you can kind of pretend that you're doing okay if you're
Mhm.
working with a professional and you're omitting facts and you're only presenting to them like, oh, this is what's going on with me. But if you're not omitting the fact that like, oh yeah, and I'm also using heroin and coke on a daily basis and like, drinking in the morning. Like if you're not omitting those facts, you're not helping yourself to be well. Like you think like, well, that went okay. That was a good session. but
No, it's so true. I
you
actually
know,
had this conversation yesterday with somebody and I said, I think actually I was talking about writing and they asked me like, "Oh, how's the writing going?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of like being in therapy. Like some days you just don't want to go. Like you're like, you know what I'm saying? Like you
yeah,
kind of just touched on it.
absolutely.
You're
Yeah.
like, I don't feel like getting upset today and I don't feel like talking about like what happened to me as a kid. And today's been going okay and I'm going to focus on these things instead, but inevitably it's going to creep back up." And so that does
Yes.
make sense. That's like, when I lost my best friend, and I've always kind of been up and down with my drinking. I've talked about this. I'm took a long break and I'm drinking again, not like I was, but I do lean on alcohol. And I go through periods of my life where when I lost Julie, my best friend, I just like, I was just drinking like a bottle and a half of wine a day just to function, and that's how, especially aces, I hate to go back to that, but this is very common, like where you like, you were not taught, and none of this is your fault, which I'm sure you were not taught how to like process stuff correctly,
So true. So true.
right?
Yeah.
So like none of this is your fault. So if like people are opinionated about like that, I'll use myself as an example. Like I openly talk about like drinking too much or I've gone through periods. Yeah, like I picked up the bottle and I was drinking all of that alcohol or you were doing the heroin. But like, what are you supposed to do if you're not really taught from a young age and not being parented? And that's what
Yes.
happened,
Yeah.
right? You were
Yeah.
your own parent for your whole entire life. And when you have to be your own parent for your whole entire life, I'm sorry, but everyone else can go F themselves if they have an opinion. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
um,
And
so
it's justifiable because
yeah.
you look at the things that are on your plate and you're
Mhm.
like, wow, that is a lot on my plate. I need 2 plates. I need 3 plates. Like
Yeah.
that's too much. And so you justify like saying like, okay, I can drink, I can have 6 cocktails tonight, or
Mhm.
I can do a half a gram of, heroin
Yeah.
or whatever, because you think like, like what's, like I can do a few lines, like, because you're like, look what I'm going through. Who wouldn't do this? And but it didn't help me to have that mentality, but I also I had like a running prescription for so many narcotics also. So um by that, by that point when he passed away, like if I didn't, because I wasn't using heroin regularly at that point, I would supplement with like Vicodin, or I had these codeine and fluorescent tablets
Mhm.
that were like magical. And I would eat them, like I'd eat 3, 4, 5 at a time, and I'd chew them up and just, like an instant hit almost, So, but I felt justified in doing it because I thought, like this is a rough time. And I would also think like it won't always be like this. Like I'll cool it in a little while. Like it'll get better. It'll magically get better. I don't know how, but I'm not going to worry about that right now.
I think that makes sense. It's like you don't want to process like the pain. And so it's like, however, you're going to get like this pain to go away, not to mention the fact that like it was very easy to get prescription pills back then.
Yeah.
So what finally clicked for you?
Well, so the year after his death, what was really hard. Like I went so hard in, and like it was not until really spiraling out and like hitting rock bottom,
Mhm.
that I even started to entertain the idea that I was an addict, that I had, that I really had a problem. And I also had this thing in my head, this template that of what my dad was like. So I was like, well, he was an alcoholic and addict. Like that's what that looks like. I don't look like that. That's not how I behave. I don't, like I had all these like checks and balances for what was an alcoholic or an addict and what wasn't. And so because I didn't match up, I had a hard time, like I didn't see myself the way I saw him. It made it
Mhm.
difficult for me to recognize that I really had a problem. And so ironically, at his memorial service, I had run into somebody in my group of friends that I didn't really know. I didn't know her well, but we chatted at his memorial, and then I kept running into her in different places, and something was different about her. Like there was something very different going on with her. And she, at one point, said to me when we ran into each other at a coffee shop, and we were sitting down drinking coffee, and she said, "You don't have to live like this if you don't want to." And I was, like I was just like, she had said something to me at the memorial also, and I can't remember what the exact phrasing was, but it was something along the same lines. She kept kind of sending me these like gentle messages that if I wanted a way out, she knew how to get out. And then progressively, I started hanging out with her more often, and uh, she would talk about going to meetings, and I really wasn't really into going to meetings because I also had not seen that work for my dad. I had seen it, do the opposite, like it didn't work for him.
Mhm.
So I didn't have uh, a lot of faith in like 12-step programs or meetings of any kind. Uh, and I had also started to go on and off methadone. So I was trying to figure out, I was trying to figure out how do I do this? And I
Yeah.
couldn't. I could not figure out how to do it. And I had also started seeing another friend in my friend group that was a roommate of the man that had passed away, and he was heavy in his addiction. So the two of us, like both trying to get clean at the same time, was just a nightmare. And so eventually I, over coffee and a cigarette, asked her about the meetings that she went to. And she wrote me a list of meetings. And I begrudgingly went to a meeting thinking that it probably wasn't going to work, but that I was out of options and didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it took.
So did
So
you just go to a meeting and you never went to rehab?
I never went to rehab
That's great.
because my ex-husband and
Uh-huh.
I had this exceptionally long divorce process. It was ridiculous. And the custody, in fact, the marriage was bifurcated so that he could actually remarry while things were still unsettled with our divorce. And so one of the things that wasn't settled was the custody of our kids. And I knew he had brought up with a mediator my heroin use. And I was like, in the room, like while he brought it up, I was like, oh, this is the nail in my coffin. Like, this is it. Like, they're going to take my kids.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, the mediators glossed over it and like didn't pick up on it, because I was also like, well, you take them to bars, and like it was this whole back
Yeah.
and forth. So they didn't really acknowledge it. And so rehab, to me, I was like, if I go to rehab, there's no way my kids' parent, their dad isn't going to know about it. Like, I'm done for.
Yeah,
He'll take my
that
kids.
you were worried
That's it.
they were gonna take the kids. How old were the
Yeah.
kids at the time?
They were young. They were like kindergarten age.
Okay.
So, or preschool age. Yeah. So,
Okay.
really young. Yeah. So,
So when you started going to meetings, was it like how did you, because that's pretty remarkable that you were able to kick that and just by going to meetings.
yeah, it was a combination of going to meetings and methadone treatment. I am a
Okay.
huge supporter of medical assisted treatment, like methadone. I mean, I don't want to be like dramatic, but like I would say between 12 steps and methadone, it saved my life.
Mhm.
And then I went back into therapy also. But I mean, I I think I'm a very strong supporter of do what you have to do to get sober, and beyond that, what you have to do to save your own life. Like whatever, however you're framing your sobriety, to me, being on methadone meant that I wasn't going out meeting the drug dealer every day. I wasn't drinking. I set parameters for myself. I was like, I'm on methadone. I'm not using. I'm not going to pick up no matter what. I'm going to work the 12 steps. I'm going to do what's suggested. I'm going to call myself out. I'm going to tell my family I've been using. Like I started being accountable to my life and to the people in my life and to myself. So it was, this combination of things. And I went to the Oakland Fellowship in California, and they were ridiculously supportive. Like they would not leave me alone. Like it was just like, hey, we're going to get barbecue. Hey, we're going to a movie. Like people would not stop calling me or picking me up. Like they would take my kids on night places, or there were other mothers, and it was just an incredible support system. And I'm like forever grateful to them. And I had a great counselor at the methadone treatment center that I was at. So it was really just a combination of a lot of amazing things that happened to occur in my life, and that I was open enough to accept those things in that moment.
You looking back, I'm wondering if so I'm pretty passionate about, also another thing I left out is the homeless crisis, and obviously the mental health crisis in our country are directly linked to drug addiction. And do you look back on what you went through and say, wow, I'm so lucky I wasn't like a statistic sitting on the streets? Or I mean, because there's so many young kids now, and then not to mention like fentanyl being like in the picture. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
I have really strong thoughts. I work with harm reduction in San Francisco, so I have very strong opinions about harm reduction and fentanyl. I've written articles about fentanyl use in young people and
Hmm.
carrying Narcan. And
By the way, the
it
Narcan was just passed. Did you see that
yes, I'm
yesterday?
so happy about it,
Yeah,
and I
I've
hope
done
it's
like,
affordable.
yeah, I know. I've done
Yeah.
multiple episodes with fentanyl survive families that have lost kids or a
Yes.
kid. Yeah. And so it's pretty scary.
Yeah, I'm terribly grateful
Hmm.
that fentanyl wasn't something I had to contend with, because
Hmm.
I am certain that if it had been, my kids wouldn't have a mother.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
And
I
it's
think that
heartbreaking.
people don't,
Yeah.
I think people are starting to realize and like having the reality that this is like a major, major crisis in our country.
Yes. Yes.
But I just wanted your thoughts on that. Like what your thoughts were about what can be done for our youth and, people that are struggling with addiction. I mean, you did it
Yeah.
and you survived. Like, what do you tell young people that you talk to about this?
Well, my kids who
Yeah.
are young adults,
Yes.
I am adamant about them carrying Narcan. I mean, they're
Mhm.
both. I mean, they grew up for the most part in 12-step rooms. Like I took them to meetings because I was a single mom, and so there's not a lot they haven't heard. My advice, if you will, to young people and to parents of young people is to educate yourself and educate the people in your lives, because you can't think that you can just casually use and that you won't encounter fentanyl, because the chances are that if you're using to any degree, or even if you use once, it could happen. Like
Mhm.
the risk is too high to not educate yourself about what you're dealing with. So I think it's really, really important to age appropriately educate young people and your children, your family members. My mother, who's in her 70s, knows about Narcan and how to use it.
Mhm.
Like I tell everyone, because you can't assume that you won't have a need to use it on someone. So, it's just important to know like how to use it and
Are there
how
videos online? Because I don't even.
there are, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something I need to read up on because I haven't, I'm sitting here talking about it and I don't even know.
Yeah,
Um,
almost
I,
any, if you Google harm reduction
okay.
Narcan video, like you'll get, like you can find them all over YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me like where you are today. I know we're skipping ahead, but you got yourself clean, which is remarkable and you should be pretty damn proud of yourself.
Thank you.
Um, but how did all of that come about? Because I know we're skipping a long period of time.
Yeah. I've always written, like even as a child, like that's kind of been my outlet because I think because I was well, maybe not because I was an only child, but that was kind of my go-to. Like I would write.
Mhm.
So I've always kept journals, diaries, I've written poetry all my life. So writing is something that is very natural for me. It's something that I feel a sense of like completion and like fulfillment. Like when I do it, it's um it's like a serene place for me to be when I'm writing, typically, unless you're writing about childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But I had started writing about I had started writing this memoir probably 15 years ago. And it was all just like notes. And because it was a lot to process, it was a lot to go back and process writing it.
Mhm.
And I knew that I was really going to have to put some work in if I was going to finish it as a book. And so I started about maybe it was about 4 years ago. I started like putting it more into like the format of like, okay, let's like make this into a real thing where it's not just notes. And I went to my mom and said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to write this book." I mean, she knew that I'd been working on different projects for years, and I said, I want to include, chapters about our life in Omaha and like about dad and
Mhm.
our lives being threatened and the kidnapping, like all these things. And, it was her father that molested me. And like, so I told her very, transparently that I was including these things and that I wanted her input on all of those if she was willing to do that. And she was.
That's great.
Yeah. So it was a really unique and special experience for me to be able to have these conversations with my mother as an adult about things that happened in my childhood that were um, like some of them seem like edited short. Like, how did that happen? Like, I understand this and I understand this. So to have these conversations with my mom and have her make it a full picture and
Mhm.
tell me like all the little gaps in my memory that I couldn't figure out how that happened, how did we get from here to there? Um, it was an incredible experience. Like I'm grateful that I finished the book, if not only for the reason that I got to have those conversations with my mother. So it was pretty special. And she originally wanted to be called a pseudonym in the book. She had this name. She was like, "Well, call me this in the book." And right before we went to print it, she said, "You know what? I think I want to use my real name." And that to me was her being like, "Yeah, I went through that. And this is part of my story. And I wanna own it." And I was like really proud of her for that.
That's pretty cool.
It really
Our
was.
parents didn't have the same opportunities like that we do. They still are, I think, stuck on, oh, don't talk about that stuff. I mean, I know
Yeah.
my mom's come on the podcast and it was difficult to get her to come on. And then she kind of told her story. And I was like, wow, mom, I can't believe you did that because they just did not, it was not something you did. You don't
Right.
spill your guts and
Publicly.
talk
Like,
about like what you've
yeah.
gone through. And I'm like, I'm the opposite. My poor kids are probably like, mom, shut up. You know, don't tell everybody everything, but whatever. It's the opposite. And I think we're pretty lucky that we're in a time where we can try and get past this stuff and really talk about it. And you sharing your story is only going to help other people,
I certainly hope so.
Yeah. I think I'm really, really honored to have you on the podcast. I love talking to you today. And
I love talking to you too. So thank you.
I want to plug your book one more time. So C, like CS, like the ocean.
Yes.
I don't want people to think C, Swallow Me is available on pre-order, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And you're saying other stores will have it shortly as well, if you're in the San Francisco area, or maybe LA, Book Soup.
Yes, I'm actually hoping to come to LA to do some reading. So,
well, I want to come see you.
Yeah, fantastic.
I would love to meet you. In closing, everybody, I love to meet people like Suki, and also you have the best name ever.
Thank you.
I think that by sharing our stories and talking about our trauma, it really helps all of us. We're in a really difficult time right now, and the more we talk about our struggles, maybe the better it will get for everybody else. So in closing, be happy by making other people happy. Thank you again.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.